Thank you. So as many of you know, our senior minister, Mark Stringer, after 16 years of shared ministry with this congregation, has decided to leave. And so next fall, we will begin our 2-year time with an interim minister in this congregation. So Mark has asked a few longtime members of our church to speak this morning about their memories of the last time we had an interim minister here. And her name was the Reverend Annie Holmes. And so they will share with us this morning about some of their memories of the transformations that began in our church with Annie's help. Mark cannot be here this morning as he is at Reverend Linda's installation service, but he wanted me to be sure to share his gratitude and thanks for their willingness to say yes to this invitation. Thank you.
My name is Chelsea Hayes, and my family has been official members for the last 3 years, but this is my childhood church. So I was nearing the end of my high school experience the last time this church went through a major ministerial change. From my perspective as youth, there was a great division in the church. Those who wanted to change and viewed change as a chance to grow and better this community. But then there were those who feared change and saw it as a loss to what they already had, a hit on the status quo. There were members who were actually dead set against change and against the hard work it takes to make a community vibrant and sustainable. These anti-change members were the tyrannical minority. They ruled with cliques and holding on tightly to the current model. This is a minority group that seems to pop up any time there are long-standing traditions coveted by others. The mantra of this group is, well, we've always done it that way. Or, insert name here, we'll be upset if we change this. Back then, the fear of the unknown was palpable. Changes created a fear of driving away members, but at the same time, there were hopeful members focused on the future, fearing that change would not come soon enough. I was a youth, and so I don't remember the exact specifics of the adult church world, but I was aware of the dysfunction that was abound. The snippets of phone calls I overheard in the evening, conversations on church that my family had at dinner, and talks amongst the adults after church on Sundays all contain the mood of unrest. Members were feeling everything from turmoil to hurt to pure rage. It was clear the church was on the cusp of big change. Thankfully, my parents fell on the change equals a new beginning side, and so I learned to embrace the unknown as an exciting new beginning. The current congregation now is in a healthier position than it was when I was a youth. Back then, it was not uncommon for hijackings of meetings, forums, and services. I remember quite a few cringe-worthy rants during Joys and Concerns, and wondering, where are the adult leaders to head this off and prevent the visitors from running to the parking lot? Meeting Annie Holmes, our previous interim minister, for the first time was a breath of fresh air. I remember her broad, mischievous smile, her short blonde hair, her dark tan from her love of being outdoors, and her ankle tattoo. I remember asking her about her job and being fascinated with her choice to move around the country, uprooting and readjusting to a new community every couple years. I remember thinking her partner must be quite amazing agreeing to this lifestyle, but also thinking with a twinge of envy how fun it must be to see the country via so many UUs. My favorite memory of Annie's time here was her assistance in a school project I was working on. We sat in the old dark minister's office, which used to be off a narrow cave-like hallway that funneled into Channing Hall from the sanctuary. This is another change we can be thankful for, remodeling of this beautiful space. But back to my favorite Annie memory. I interviewed her on sexual orientation discrimination policy in schools. Annie helped me find resources, form thoughts, and seek an approach to writing a persuasive paper on changing the current policy at my high school to include LGBTQ rights. This paper was not met with any enthusiasm from the administration, actually quite a bit of pushback. The policy was eventually changed a year or so later, though not due to my paper. However, the biggest change was in me. An interim minister took the time to meet with me, thoughtfully listen and respond, and show me what side of history I wanted to be on. Annie, an interim minister, helped shape my future life as a UU during that meeting. I went on to college, and I tried attending church at the UU Church in Iowa City, but I never met the substance I was looking for there. I eventually took a job in Greensboro, North Carolina, where I began to regularly attend a UU church there. It was hard going. It was hard being the new person, and it took a long time for me to make any lasting connections there. But I stuck with it. I stuck with it because all the while, back here in Des Moines, this church was growing. It was improving. My family moved back to Des Moines almost 4 years ago, and I am forever grateful for this community. The contrast between then and now, and here and there, is great. And sure, change is scary, and the unknown is great, but that is the risk we take in exchange for community with other human beings. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Nicole Keller, and I've been a member of this church for I'm not quite sure how long, because my membership got all messed up, but it's been at least 40 years. Being a First Unitarian member in the early 2000s was not easy. We were a club of those Unitarians who are disappointed but keep coming back. We were in a membership stalemate of 190 to 200 members for decades. We were unknowingly imposing a culture of scarcity upon ourselves. Our annual budget was determined by how much we pledged, rather than our pledges being based on what programs and staff we wanted. Parents of our church children were the teachers of Sunday school. We only had one service, so that split us into the upstairs church and the downstairs church. The roof leaked into staff offices, on the new desktop computers, and into Channing Hall. Barb Royal, hi Barb, assembled the drip-catching wastebasket brigade every time it rained. They were lined up all through the building. We knew where the leaks were by where the wastebaskets were. Human relations crises created an atmosphere of cautious, divisive interrelations. Among the dark happenings, one of our teens filed a criminal assault charge against our part-time janitor, a Bosnian refugee. He was eventually found not guilty. Our choir director, a long-term member, filed a lawsuit against the church alleging disability discrimination. The lawsuit went on for 2 years. One of our single female members accused a male member of sexual assault. And the most unfortunate, one of our very active young adult members committed suicide. In spite of all of this, we were a force for good in the community. We were the first church in Des Moines to be designated a welcoming congregation. Many of our members, as individuals, were very active in social justice efforts in the community. And we had aspirations. We wanted to grow. We wanted to fix the roof and update the building that had been neglected for nearly 60 years. We wanted the church itself to be a positive force for justice in the community. At an early winter board meeting, our minister, then Thea Neatfeld, surprised us with her resignation, effective the end of her 3rd year. It was her first ministry, and she was overwhelmed. We were shocked, and some of us were angry. In the end, it turned out to be the best outcome for everyone. When we contacted UUA to replace Thea, they told us we had much work to do before they would consider supporting our search for a settled ministry. It's a great reputation to have. They offered us only interim candidates. We had never had an interim minister. What does an interim minister do? UUA explained that interim ministers are trained to ready congregations for settled ministers. They work with the congregation to identify needed operational and programming improvements and to design a future vision. All of this work leads to an understanding of the skills and talents to look for in the future settled minister. We were a tough assignment for an interim minister. We needed brutally honest leadership and tough love. We got both when we got Annie Holmes. As board president, I was the first to meet with Annie. She asked me to give her all the dirt. She knew there was dirt. I told her about an email war that was playing out among us about the single religious truth, God or no God. It was destructive. We tried to influence it to soften the tone. We couldn't, and then we tried to stop it, but couldn't do that either. She called a congregational meeting the Wednesday night of her second week here to address the email war. Speakers had to get in line to deliver their point of view at a microphone. They had 1 minute. Telling Unitarians they have 1 minute. Ooh. If they had more to say, they had to go to the end of the line and wait for their turn again. No comments were allowed from the audience. Annie was the timer, and she was the judge of respect. She was brutal, and she was fun. The email war ended that night, and we knew we had a force in our interim minister. Annie launched the congregation into an in-depth assessment of our church, our finances, our future vision of the congregation by race, religious beliefs, age, income, gender, sexual preference. The programming assessment included religious education, hospitality, congregational care, responsible behavior, relationships with our neighbors, other churches, and our community, staffing, and finally, the condition of our property. Some things were resolved immediately, and longer-term needs were noted for future action. She insisted we have a cottage-style annual campaign, something we had not done before. She went to all 20 meetings. She modeled how to run a pledge campaign of abundance rather than scarcity. She taught us about fair share. The campaign was a huge success. About halfway through Annie's first year, it was apparent that we were not ready to call a settled minister for the next year. We had not yet started work on our vision of the future, the most important piece. Annie extended her interim ministry to a second year. Harvey, who's going to tell more later, and others worked with Annie in creating the long-term vision and the plan to achieve it. Some of you are asking, why a 2-year interim? Why not just a 1 year? Our congregation is in a good place, and we are told that we are a plum for a settled minister. Here's why we need 2 years. The search and candidating process typically takes 5 months, ending in May, so it must start no later than January. Backing up, the interim arrives in July or August. A 1-year interim leaves only 4 to 5 months to assess the congregation, decide future goals, and determine skills and talents to look for in the settled ministry. It is just not enough time. We are nearing the end of the Mark chapter of our church's history, the longest chapter. We are going to miss Mark. We are a bit scared, but wait, what will it take to continue our exceptionalism? Is this an opportunity to again take stock and commit ourselves to another stretch goal to being an even more exceptional congregation? What can we do better? What more do we want to do? What do we want our next chapter to be?
I appreciate the opportunity to join Nikki and Chelsea this morning to talk about the interim ministry that Annie Holmes had and her time here in the church and how that interim ministry informed the last 16 years of our church life. Most simply stated, and you've heard some of this already, Annie challenged us a lot. By the time that Annie left and Mark Stringer became our settled minister, our view of what we could do as a church had been transformed, both as a result of the hard work that we had done, the vision that many of us had for what we could become, and the challenges that Annie threw down to make sure that we moved forward in implementing those visions. And by 2001, when she left, we had embraced a vision for our church based upon transformation and growth. We believe, I dare say, we had faith that we could generate the energy, we could generate the commitment, and we could provide the financial resources to make that vision a reality. As Nikki said, Annie led us through the creation of a long-range plan that we called 505 in 05. In other words, we committed ourselves to over doubling the size of our congregation in 5 years. As Nikki said, it was the first long-range plan for our congregation, at least in all of the years that I had been a part of the church, which was then about 25 years. The plan was simple. It had very specific year-by-year goals on how we could transform and grow our church. And we took this kind of attitude that Annie helped us create, this positive can-do attitude, and we had that integrated into our thinking. And as a result of that, we actually passed a budget that embraced the idea of abundance and the notion that we could actually realize the transformative vision for our church that we had been working on. What has transpired in the last 16 years, I think, proves that we were absolutely right in making those steps. Annie also challenged us on how we treated visitors coming in through our doors. Sally Buckle, then a new member herself, recalls this. Annie challenged us to repel fewer visitors. She said we thought of ourselves as friendly, but that the church looked very different to a visitor. She encouraged us to approach people we didn't know at coffee hour, go figure, instead of huddling together with our buddies. Does that sound familiar? Think of the difference today for people coming through our doors. We make affirmative efforts to greet people and welcome them when they come and join us for the first or dozens of times. Think also of the paths that we have created over the past 16 years for people to learn more about our church and to become more engaged in the life of our church. We know that we can still improve upon this, but we are way further ahead than we were in 1999. The long-range plan said that we needed to add staff to accommodate the growth that we were going to experience, and you'll notice it was going to experience. So we planned for and hired the first full-time administrator in our church history. Happened to be Barb Royal, who's sitting back there. By 1999, our canvassing process had become pretty passive. And again, Nikki talked about this. In order to fund the vision that we were creating, we needed to raise more money. It was as simple as that. Annie helped us to organize the canvass based upon house meetings, much like the ones that we just finished. And as Nikki said, she attended every one. And one of the things I had real fun doing as I was preparing this was I talked to a number of people who were there at the time. To a person, that was the single thing we all remembered regardless of any other members, that she had come to every one of those things and had driven that canvassing process. We raised enough money that year to make our congregation more attractive to a larger range of ministerial candidates, and look what happened because of that. We hired some young guy named Stringer. That seemed to work out okay, I think. We also, as a part of this process, planned for and transformed the position of religious education director. It had been part-time up until then, and we transformed that into a full-time position. And we now have, of course, Tracy Beck and a truly vital religious education program in our church. We planned for and financed a major reconstruction of this beautiful church building for the first time since its construction in 1957. Annie referred to our building as a white elephant. She said we should turn it into the UU retirement home. She said we should hold our services in a big circus tent. There's more in terms of the planning that we did, but you get the idea. We did pretty damned good. So I would like the people who were here at that 2-year period of time to stand up for a minute. You'll notice it's about half the room, but there's also a lot of people who weren't here. Thank you very much. Like many, I'm sad to see Mark leave. I'm also thrilled for him and for the ACLU of Iowa that he will remain in our community as a strong voice for justice. Mainly, I'm excited by the prospect of our upcoming interim ministry and the opportunity that it once again presents. I think some simple comparisons are informative. In 1999, as you might guess from some of the prior things that have been said, we weren't considered a model congregation. Now, we are considered by the Unitarian Universalist Association in our region and our community as a vital UU congregation. In 1999, we were an aging congregation. We'd been in a membership plateau for a long time. Now we get to cherish the voices of and energy of the young families and children that we have. With first service, it was great watching all of the youngsters just absolutely run out the door as quickly as they could. In 1999, we had limited programming for youth and adults. We are now so busy on Wednesday nights that Mark Ewert, the UUA consultant that we have been using, pointed out that the number of people in our church on an average Wednesday evening is larger than the membership of 1/2 of all of the Unitarian Universalist congregations in the United States. Enough people that we need more space for the programs we now offer. I think that's really something. So, the next 2 years, while we have another interim minister, gives us the opportunity, like that we had in 1999, to plan for the next era in our church life. There are many of us in this room who are passionate about this church, and I'm one of them, who believe that we offer a unique religious home for the people of Central Iowa. If you're one of those people, it is now time to step into the leadership roles that will lead us into this next era of transformation. To embrace what we have been doing well, which is a lot of things, to help discern what we can do better, which is also a lot of things, to commit to identifying the most transformative steps that we can take to make our wonderful church an even better place for the next 16 years. I'm excited by this prospect, and I hope that you are also.